Okay, welcome everyone to the virtual world of the Eastside Freedom Library. I'm Peter Ratcliffe, the now emeritus co-executive director. We've had a leadership transition, and Beth Cleary and I have stepped back, and Sangmini Labut is the new executive director. I see our colleague Clarence White is with us, and Beth is with us today as well. So today is also the opening of the physical exhibit of some of Carolyn's work in the Essential Worker Portraits downstairs at the Eastside Freedom Library. We're going to see some images of the work today, but I want to encourage everyone to come in and see it in person because it just glows and is stunning to actually see. And the plan for today is to get an introduction to Carolyn's work and to have a conversation between Carolyn and our friend Keith Christensen, who is also an activist artist. Not sure which is the adjective and which is the noun. And the exhibit will be up for a month. And I want to make sure you're all aware that a week from today, same time, same Zoom space, we will have a panel of workers whose jobs are depicted in the art, speaking next Sunday about how it feels to be represented in this art, and also to give us a little more detail and nuance about what working in the pandemic has been like for them. So the plan for today is I'm going to say a little bit about Carolyn and Keith. Keith wants to share a little bit of information about this exhibit and the challenges that essential workers have been facing. Carolyn will then walk us through some of the images. They will then have a bit of a conversation, and I want to encourage everyone to use the chat to pose questions or make comments, and I will try to track those and read them out to Keith and Carolyn. We are recording this so that it will be available on the YouTube page for the Eastside Freedom Library. We also want to give a very special welcome to Carolyn's friend Meg Weaves, who is joining us all the way from New Zealand, where she says it's very early in the morning. And so we may not actually see her, but we're thrilled that she's with us, the wonders of Zoom. Great. So let me say a little bit about Carolyn and Keith. Carolyn is a narrative artist working and living in northern Minnesota. She uses gouache, oil, or pastel and depicts everyday life stories. Figures and intentionally exaggerated and gestures emotive. Olson recently retired from teaching K-12 art for more than 30 years. She's continuing to work in her studio and recently completed this wonderful series of narrative portraits of essential workers during the pandemic. She was inspired by family members working as essential workers, and that led her to dig even more deeply and broadly into these experiences. Let me find my notes. Yes. So, and Keith has been with us since we started the Eastside Freedom Library. He's devoted decades to designing and creating public art, engaging the issues of our times. He long taught at St. Cloud State University, and he now also carries that adjective emeritus So he's an emeritus professor in their art department. He's worked with us by designing our beautiful logo, creating and painting the marvelous sign out front, and working with us on his installation, Game Turn, which uses the unfolding of the 1934 Minneapolis Teamsters strike as a means to promote strategic thinking. Keith is about to have a show open in New York City, along with Indigenous artist Edgar Heap of Birds. And we hope everyone will find a way to get to New York to see Keith's exhibit there. And we hope that you'll come into the East Side Freedom Library and actually play the Game Turn board game that he's created. I'll add parenthetically, when he returns it to us. It lived at the library and then he took it for an exhibit, and we haven't gotten it back yet. But we miss it, Keith, and we look forward to it being back in its home. So I'm going to turn things over to Keith, who wants to provide some context for us. Keith, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Peter. I feel at home with the East Side Freedom Library. I'm glad to be a supporter. I have to say I'm really intrigued and pleased to see Carolyn's work. It really is very meaningful, and it resonates with me and a lot of folks. I wanted to start off the discussion that I think we'll have, and I like Carolyn's approach, which is to show the work and have a kind of a back and forth about it. I hope I can chip in for that. But I thought we would start with a few words about the essential workers, since, you know, it's only been 2 years since this whole disaster happened. And 2 years ago, things looked a little differently. And maybe we'll talk about that as we go on. But I'd like to just start off with a few descriptions of essential workers. So this is from the Economy Policy Institute on Essential Workers. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, and from 2020, and it's relevant to everybody, right? Everybody in this connection here, in this Zoom, and the world has gone through this, and it's already been 2 years since it started, and we're still affected by it. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has shut down much of the US economy, with over 33 million workers applying for unemployment insurance since March. Millions of workers are still on the job providing essential services. Nearly every state governor has issued executive orders that outline the industries deemed essential during the pandemic, which typically includes healthcare, food service, and public transportation, among others. However, despite being categorized as essential, many workers in these industries are not receiving the most basic health and safety measures to combat the spread of the coronavirus. Essential workers are dying as a result. While the Trump administration has failed to provide essential workers basic protections, working people are taking action. Some are walking off the job in protest over unsafe conditions and demanding personal protective equipment, and unions are fighting to ensure workers are receiving adequate workplace protections. That was 2 years ago, and now, you know, has it developed much? Well, it's evolving. There was a interview with Carolyn with Amy Stager from Workday magazine. It was this year, and I think it's very insightful, that the discussion they had. And I'd just like to share some of what Amy Stager said. 2.5 years ago, an ensemble of willing and unwilling heroes embarked on a journey filled with suffering. They faced the impossible task of keeping society functioning through a disruptive, deadly disease outbreak. Many of these workers were forced to toil in unfavorable, uncertain conditions. Many fell ill, many died. Those who survived were left with the losses of trauma and burnout. Some even got a few extra $100 for their sacrifices. These modern heroes Essential workers are expected to risk their lives and the lives of those around them when they go to work every day. Without their labor, our ways of life would be even more disrupted than they already have been through this deadly pandemic. This image of heroism for working through mass death and disabling events like pandemics and climate disasters only serves those who profit from underpaying and undervaluing the most essential work. The most essential your work is, the more essential your work is, the less you really earn. And we aren't allowed to imagine a world without this exploitation, because working is bred into us as a survival mechanism so that we can contribute to reproducing a system that's killing us. So I just wanted to start with a few thoughts on the context for Carolyn's work. I'd like to just react with Carolyn about the subjects of her work. And so I'll just turn it over to you, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Those are great comments. Amy's coverage has been pretty important, especially at this time. I think there was a lax, they talk about the exhaustion of COVID. People didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to invite the conversations into their lives anymore. And I find that that's actually not as true as people might think, because Amy, for example, lost her father because of this. He died from COVID working at a shop, and you know that loss is with their family, and there's many families just like that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see right here, so you can see some of the images. Is that look okay?
Great.
Okay, so there's about 12 images down at the Eastside Freedom Library. The way I would choose the subjects of the images, I looked for people that had to work face-to-face with the general public as a rule, had to go into those private spaces and do their job. So plumbers, anybody that had to come and fix your hot water heater, all of those kinds of workers had to go into private spaces. So there's a child peeking around trying to figure out what this worker is doing. And you know, what are you walking into? Early on, we had no clue. We didn't know if you shouldn't touch things, as you recall. We were wearing gloves. So all my images, I put masks and gloves. As you can see, the masks are fabric because I couldn't afford N94s. So we were sewing masks. People were sewing masks like crazy, doubling up, sewing masks. So sometimes when you see the images, you're like, what is that? That is, sometimes it's what I knew to be true, and sometimes it's what I wish was true. Or it was my fears. It's like Peter said, the series was born out of my kids, one working in a grocery store, one being a public school teacher, music. So the kids would tell me day by day, or right at the beginning, day by day, this changed, this changed, this changed. I'm done teaching, I'm home. I had 300 kids blowing at me every day, Mom. We're at home now. So those kinds of fears for me, no vaccines, the protections were distance. That's all they could really control was keeping a distance. But in the grocery store, plexiglass shields and anxiety every day, another thing, it just became unbearable. So then I think Peter put it very well. I just started looking into who all is involved, who all is sharing this anxiety, who are our workers, and what is being done to make their lives better. I feel like we asked people to go in and work, and some people had no insurance. They had, they'd say, go home if you're sick, separate yourself from the people that you love so you don't get them sick in a 1-bedroom apartment. How is that going to happen? They can't make enough money to get a large enough apartment. And even here, this isn't the image of it, but a lot of the emergency ambulance drivers, they didn't have insurance because they couldn't afford it. So we're asking them to go into the homes of the sick and carry them to the hospitals, which they did. Bus drivers carried people where they needed to go, and they died from it. My underlying thinking with the whole series is that I want better sustainable changes made because we have these discussions. It's a place to talk about, do you know people like you? There's a secretary in the back. She's right in the middle of it all, and she's probably not making a lot of money. Maybe some of these are doctors and nurses. I don't know, but they were all there together when we didn't know any better. So they're wearing shields, gloves, but this person is, you can tell the person is sick, and 3 people flying this guy down the hall, you know.
Can I ask you, Carolyn, what is the title for this?
Okay, so this one is the ER medical workers, the nurses, okay, the doctors, and the secretaries.
Okay, and the previous one was
a plumber.
Plumber, okay.
Plumber, yeah. I'm sorry, I should have said.
No,
yeah,
I'm just going to go with you and react in some ways. And I really feel it in my bones that this is all about this situation. And everybody in this Zoom conversation has felt it. And it has changed since 2020 because we're all afraid to die. And then you're sharing, your own perspective as a teacher for 30 some years, and you have a son who's a music teacher and a daughter who's working, as an essential worker. And it's real, and the subject is real. But I wanted to stop a minute and just ask about your medium, not to sidetrack it, but I think you're making some, really powerful decisions. And one of them is not to use photography. It's pastel, and it's really a vibrant color and using line. And in this one, especially, you're describing things with your drawing, and your composition is allowing us to feel it, but it's not a photograph, right? It's very much some kind of interpretation of things and a reassembling of things from my point of view that has impact. That a photograph, well, it's something else, and that's the power of your work. And I am affected by it. I guess I want to share that.
Thanks. Yeah, when you create work new, you can take the distractions out and put in what you need people to see. And whether they see all of it, I don't know. Like, do we really see this little guy, or do we see the cat sleeping on the bed? Do we see the attic door, but we do see this person who's bigger than life, very orderly, try not to get water everywhere,
I get the feeling of description and the subject matter of Plumber and the life that goes with that in a residential home, and tools and cat on the bed. But I also get a sense of the colors aren't super bright. There's a little bit of muted, kind of, I think, tastefully done. There's this idea of it's not only about the expression of the color and there's a kind of a somberness to it. And then I look at the eyes of your figures and the kind of body language. It's like it's in some ways effectively distorted. But it's purposeful, and it's like the role of visual art, of pastel work that is coming through. You're really tying into your medium and letting that be part of the story. And so I'm engaging with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're catching things that I like. Gesture. I think line provides more gesture, just being able to have a drawn line. If I talk about these from a technical perspective, you can see light shading here and here. I mean, different things, but there's probably 3 layers of pastel on there. There's the initial drawing, but then there's a pastel layer of color, probably another layer of color. Then I might go in and do all the black. Then I'll go back in with the color, and it becomes, I'm using the pastel almost like paint. So it's I want that rich color, to show gradation, to show emphasis on what I want you to look at. So yeah, the pastel is fast. And that I think also lent to my anxiety because I could get it out fast. Some of these drawings came very quickly. When things were happening, I couldn't, I would draw maybe 2 or 3 at a time just to kind of keep moving. Sometimes it's obvious that I did them together. But sometimes I think moving quickly and then enjoying the composition of it, the line, the breaking up of the foreground and the background, and then simplifying it, like you say, so the story is clear. I think this story is very clear of the anxiety. I wasn't in a hospital. I did look at photos. I tried to listen to stories. I talked to people who worked in these fields, but most of it was, I wasn't there. So I had to interpret my own personal experiences. But this one, mechanics, this is one where, we all needed our car fixed. And I know they work alone a lot, but I still felt like it was the unsung hero, the person that's keeping everything going, just like there's a drawing of the IT guy. I just felt like if we didn't have some of these things, we didn't have decent vehicles to transport or IT running, internet running, we would be sunk, especially. But I think also I like the repetition of the patterns created through the repetition of the tools and the contrast of the shop. But anyway.
Can I just jump in and say, as a painter, I appreciate this process, because the process is a development. It isn't just like a picture, like a snapshot, right? You put your forms out there and you compose it, and then it kind of develops. And in some ways, it's like a journey, like a discovery, at least from my point of view. And then things come out of that, and it's almost like there's new meaning, or meaning becomes more clear. And I feel that's one of the characteristics of your work. There's a clarity that's coming out of something. It isn't just the snapshot. It's developed. There's a real conscious concern for visual language, for the composition, for the rhythm, and all those things have to be kind of orchestrated. And that, I think it's quite apparent. But you're all the time connecting to the meaning, and that's really impactful.
As a retired school teacher, schools were forefront in my mind. It was my first year not teaching when I retired 2019. That winter was the COVID. But if you've ever ridden on a school bus drivers are your mom and dad away from homes. Where I taught rural northern Minnesota, some of the kids were on the bus for almost 2 hours one way. So that driver was on the bus with you a lot, knew you very well. And I talked to my son about their schools. He said sometimes buses would come. There's a picture coming up where the bus would come and they would check to see if their temperatures were high, or somebody would get sick on the bus. They knew someone was sick. The whole bus would just turn around and go home. We didn't know. You don't want the whole class to get sick. So this whole bus drivers get paid minimum wage if they're lucky. And we all know that there aren't enough drivers and not getting paid enough to work the hours and the conditions that they're asked to work and carry our children. So I just felt like the drivers were heroes. Good drivers make or break a kid's day at school sometimes. You get off that bus and you've been cared for, you are safe. Some drivers aren't able to do that as well, but it's not an easy situation. And you can see the kids know what's going on. I always want to honor that they know what's going on. They're ready to go to school, but yeah, are we going to get through today? But you can see the joy in the driver. I think she's got some fun in her. like get in here and let's go, you know. But was not easy. The school situation was a whole nother deal. This is what was, I don't know if you remember this. They get off the buses first thing, they spread them out in the line, take their temperature, and then they'd write it down. And if they weren't sick, you know, all these checks to get into the school. Did every school do this? No. But, you know, this is the first thing. This is before that. Good morning. Come into, you know, it's before you get in the school. So, but as a society, what do we do? If you're going to go to school, we have to figure out how to keep you safe. So the kids have their backpacks. They had rules to follow to stay safe. Some kids could deal with it and some kids couldn't. It was too hard. So they had to stay home. But the teachers were there. You can see the teachers are there.
It's fun to hear you talk because you've been thinking about this and you kind of have these intentional meanings for it. My own reaction is just formally, it kind of makes me think of a tapestry. It's like, you know, it's like a rug, or it's not a deep space. It's not a, you know, a Renaissance space. It's kind of flatter space. So there's, in a way, that kind of slows things down and makes it kind of timeless in a way. That's how I'm reacting visually with it. Yeah.
I like the guy in particular in the front, not getting involved, but watching everything. And I do think I do like to play with eyes and gesture. I think we notice more whether we can do anything about whatever is around us. Is up, you know, is it just, we don't know, but I like playing levels of interaction against each other. I like playing with bright, dark, and light. As you can see, the borders are I draw on brown paper, and I draw with pastel, and it's, people say, why don't you draw on white? It just never comes out as rich as it does. In my mind, I think I need to start on a neutral surface, a brown surface. It just brings the color stronger. It's a nice Stonehenge paper, right? Rag paper, but yeah, the floor, this was the cement work in the new schools that you probably see when they do the cement work. They try and make these swirls, and that's what I kept going back to. The school I was in was a new construction, and they had, I don't know if they had this outside, but I saw it a lot inside. This one is
go ahead.
This one's about elderly parents being at home and the family having to bring things, and still there's this, you can see the kids are like paying attention. They're not crowding, they're not screwing around, and it's upstairs. So hauling everything up there takes everyone's care, and the mom is like, you know, okay, so stop, let me figure out, let's get this straight. This is my mom. That's my mom in the door. So, you know, all of these images, for me, I have to refer to some image in my head. I say I have a Rolodex of pictures and scenes in my head, and then I just draw from there often. This is my mom's apartment, and I didn't have little kids during COVID, but we would haul things in. But it took families, and I feel like families had to be there for their parents and their neighbors that couldn't go out. People with illness, young, even if they were young, they needed a neighbor to go to the grocery store to haul groceries to the door, and then they'd leave them by the door. A lot of people did this, and I think they still do this, but probably not to the degree. But what were you going to say?
I'm liking the kind of depiction of family, and as an aside, I say I like the way your eyes kind of go. They dart this way and dart that way, which is a kind of a psychological level of kind of interaction. They're looking this way, looking that way, or maybe looking straight at you. And so there's the kind of a dynamic, personal, human thing going on there. And I like also the sizes of the figures are small and large. So you've made them each special, I think.
Yeah. Well, trying to figure out how to fit into this situation we're in too. when you talk about the eyes, I think that isn't that all of our struggle? How are we going to do this to get everybody through? It just didn't seem like we had the support from the supports in place to help. And so, but we did have some information about not, don't touch your face, those kinds of things. Yeah. It still resonates, all of those things in my mind. The gloves are in the series from the beginning to the end, just because, and I know we didn't wear them towards the end, but I still saw people, terrified young woman in the grocery store one time in her gloves, in her double mask with a shield. She was trying to get groceries. And at that time, they made us do aisles one way, this aisle, the next aisle is the other way. She was just terrified. And I thought, I felt badly for her. And I'll probably never forget how she had to get that stuff and get out of there. But she was alone. That's the other thing. I think she was very alone. But anyway.
Yeah.
This is pretty, the people that cleaned up after everyone, there's I did a drawing of the laundry service at the hospital. People that cleaned up after everyone was gone. And we didn't know what we were dealing with sometimes still. So we are asking people to go in and clean up after us. And it's not just the cold, it's something going to kill you. So I felt like that the folks that went in and cleaned after all of us, and they would do it at night, or they would, we weren't there all the time, but they still had to go in and clean. Truly unsung hero, as far as I'm concerned, the cleaners, maintenance guys. This is based on a university hall. You know how they do all those little displays in the windows.
Yeah. You have to say the way you treated the mop, the kind of swirling thing, without knowing the story, the backstory, my eye goes to that, and it kind of starts it just visually, it just gets me going, and everything is kind of swirling. There's a famous artist, Edvard Munch, who's famous for doing the Scream. I don't know if you know that. And anyway, he had this kind of a swirling kind of atmospheric treatment. And there's something that I see your subject matter is integrated with your treatment, which is the swirling lines and the
and also the color. So if you look at this one in particular, the swirl pulls you. If you start following through follow the yellow, follow the everything. The hope is, graphically it's pretty tight. Drawing, they're not always the greatest, but the hope is that by keeping things graphically tight and by doing things with color and line, it connects us to what's being talked about. I mean, it's pretty obvious that you can tell that the mop is heavy because of the stance of the person. We know how much those mops weigh when they're wet. Yeah. To slosh them from side to side takes some effort. And then I want to throw in, and you're nervous if you're going to get sick and die that day. You don't know. That's what we're asking these folks to do. And and like we did talk about, the workers there was a minimal pay that they got in addition to their fee, but then it was taken away. So these guys might be union, might not. How many workers are not working under any considerations for hourly wage people? If you get sick, there was a time you had to be out for 10 days. Now you can go back hourly worker, from what I understand, if you have no symptoms and test negative. This is coming off the back of, 20 years ago, we just took Dayquil. That would get us through the day. It's not like that anymore, Right. Nurses and doctors. This is a nurse feeding someone who is obviously really sick. And I just take my hat off to nurses. I think the nursing industry has never, I don't know, they've got to be able to come back with this, but we have to start paying them, or we all understand what this is talking about, but the connection between and the compassion that I saw from the stories that I read and from the experiences I had with medical people, because I had some medical health issues during this time. It was, they were amazing. But I don't know why they aren't being treated as such. So
I react to it like, is this dystopia? Is this for real? What kind of science fiction is this? But we know since this last year is that this has been a reality.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, I was in Stockholm this summer, and I went to an exhibit of paintings, and they had some old paintings, and some were of the influenza pandemic, the Spanish flu of like 1918, and they had a number of paintings then there from that era, and mostly the ones I saw were of death scenes and kind of funeral kind of settings where people were crying, and they were over the body and things. So in a way, I'm kind of contrasting this approach, which is to show the living in a kind of a fear and a kind of absurdity, but living and doing something, and it's not over. It's getting through it. Yeah.
When the Minnesota Historical Society first contacted me about the series, the woman that was putting together History Is Now blog, we talked for quite a while, and she said she felt there, because of the color, there was joy, even in such a dark time. It was very dark at the beginning, as you recall it. All of us didn't know. And she said, but there is some joy, and maybe that is the hope that I wanted things to get better. I am a colorist. I love color. I love playing with color and line. It's not something I considered. It's just something I did. But it's interesting when you say the contrasting. Spanish flu has come into my mind a lot, how people got through, and then we're going to get through this too. Mm-hmm. So what the hits the industry took, we heard about. I have another one of the egg packers. I don't know what it looked like meat packing. This was what I imagined. People were working. I tried to think, how would I protect someone if I had to? And I still look at it now and I say, they're wearing cloth masks. But it's what we had. You do your best. You get a mask on them, cover them, separate them. But still, it was terrible. And the conditions for the workers was not safe. And because of our wanting meat and our industry, the industry wanting to provide meat, who provided it then? I know that this isn't a simple question, because you've got farmers and everything, but I just feels like rather than making changes that would benefit workers as well as the general public, we've done nothing. The hope, when I started this series, I remember my son said, when are you going to be done with this? And I said, I don't know. And then we decided that we would all be vaccinated by July 2021. So that's when it should be ending. Yeah. And we had no idea at that time that we wouldn't have taken care of people. We wouldn't have made things better. So this is just carpenters. I noticed talking to the shops, they said a lot of people came with, they were going to fix things at their house because they're stuck at home. But even still, the people couldn't interact. They still would work out. So they'd work outside if they could work. They could make a living. But
it makes me think a little bit of the artist Jacob Lawrence.
One of my favorites. Yeah.
He did descriptions, and I think he did a series called The Builders.
Yeah.
And there's something about, literally they're building, they're making, but there's another component with yours. It's just this kind of people inside watching, right? And this kind of, the relationship of inside, outside, and there's that's a kind of a psychological element. It isn't just describing the building. It's they're building in the context of everybody else hunkering down and wondering how things are going to get done. Yeah. And then I see an element of compassion. The woman coming out with drinks for the workers. It's rich. You're exploring different things and the complexity of it. It feels lifelike that way.
Jacob Lawrence is probably influencing more than anybody in my life, between Giacometti and Carl Larson from my early childhood. But Jacob Lawrence in particular, the Builder series, it's interesting you bring it up because I found that series when I was 20. And in fact, I was working in Mississippi at the time. We did a big mural. We wrote Jacob Lawrence and asked him if we could use one of his images from the Builder series to put up on the wall outside the high school. And he agreed. He said, just say that it's mine, but sure, go ahead. And so he made this huge, from the Builder series, the one with the family walking by. It was exciting for me. In fact, I found that his narrative storytelling inspired me so much. Most of these, I think it's the idea of everyday life, honoring everyday life, the joy in your dad picking you up on his arms when he gets back from work, like a puppet, or making some food together, or taking music lessons, building the front porch that was rotten. All those things are part of everyday life. And if we don't start documenting and then showing people this is who we are, rather than letting us depict ourselves in ways that might not be. We are a compassionate people. We are a family. We protect our young ones. Probably, they're keeping their little daughter inside. All of these things are who we are. And I believe that through my art, I can show you what I personally think makes for a good life. It's not exclusive. It's not everything, but Jacob Lawrence was one of those people that told the truth all the time. His drawings, whether it was the John Brown series or the Builder series or whatever. And we needed that. We still need that, I think, even more so. We need to tell those stories. And hopefully somebody could look at this and say, yeah, that was my auntie went and worked on their front porch and fixed it during COVID. She could work outside. She knew this work. That's kind of what I'm hearing is from people, is these things resonate with them as far as family. This is one of the examples of, we weren't vaccinated yet. My daughter was working in the grocery store and I wanted her vaccinated and I didn't know how they were going to do it. So when I was little, they hauled us all down to the gym and gave us polio vaccine on a sugar lump, or they put us in a line and just vaccinated us all. So I'm like, okay, get all those workers in the back room at the grocery and just give them their vaccination. They'll go back to work. In my head, because the place was busy. I don't know when they started the counting of how many people could go in a grocery or a shop at a time. I know they counted.
Can you share, just because I'm a little uncertain, this is in a grocery store?
So this is my daughter, and I'm depicting how she's going to get vaccinated at a grocery store.
Okay.
And I know it didn't happen this way. Okay. She wasn't vaccinated till end of April. And when she got her notice, she said other people in the grocery store got them too. And they just cried because they had been so anxious. It'd been 2 months of working 40 hours a week, if not more, not knowing. And so my idea was, I did 5 pictures of people getting vaccinated. One's the grocery store worker, one's a doctor, the farm workers, bus drivers, and school teachers. Because I just thought we can do this. Get moving. They need the vaccination. So, but you can see it's crowded, and you can see nothing.
I get a sense of all this life activity and the store, but there's this fear. This gotta fight it. Gotta be vaccinated, and the person is injecting is doing the job. helping, but there's an element of fear within the
Yeah.
day-to-day life of going on with your shopping. It's part and parcel of the experience, huh?
Yeah. 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 So I don't know about you, but this was our going out to eat if we could. We wanted to support the food trucks, restaurants. We'd get takeout if we could afford it. But the workers, I mean, they still are right there in front talking to everybody. But this was something I think that a lot of us did to try and just make our neighborhood and community work better.
Yeah. I actually get a very joyful feeling from this. The bright green and the child in the front is kind of playfully being a child, and all the elements are there. The more I look at it, the more I see the complexities of it. Another thing that kind of strikes me is that in the series, it's one thing to look at one image, but then you realize the recurring mask and the recurring gloves. So that's tying things together. This experience from all these different kinds of essential workers and essential experiences. Yeah.
I mean, even the woman down the bottom in the orange, she's older. She's giving her money to someone to go get the food. I did that. I'm like, I'm not going up there. I would wait till the line would go. But you can still, it's foreshortened, but you can still see people are kind of separated. And parents, I believe parents hung on to their kids more. I don't know if you notice that too, but I often draw a mom's arm is around that kid or hanging on to that kid somehow. But yeah, neighborhood trucks, food trucks. So that's everything that's at the.
Okay. Well, are we closing it down, Carolyn, or did you?
Yeah, that's all the images that are at the Eastside Freedom Library at this time. If you wanted to see all of the images, you could go to my website, which is carolynolson.net. And at the top, there's a spot where it says essential worker portraits, and you can see all of them. But and they go by topic. There's service workers, there's lots of them have to do with school, transportation workers, delivery, just the packaging, delivery guys, mail carriers. Just trying to think of the varieties of, but the names of them are pretty much what the name of the person is that's in the picture. So.
Okay.
But, Peter, did anyone have questions?
Well, why don't stop the screen sharing, if you would, okay. Carolyn, okay. And we'll get everybody's boxes here on the screen. Okay. And again, I want to encourage you all to pose questions in the chat. We're actually a small enough group. If you would like to turn your videos on and raise your mechanical hand or your flesh and blood hand and ask a question, make a comment, please do. Carolyn, how many images are there in all?
There's 100. So the first one was a cashier and bagger at the grocery store. The last one is of an image based on Fond du Lac Reservation's clinic. Up here, their little clinic was probably one of the best at getting everyone vaccinated when vaccinations were available. And they also did an amazing job in how they would take care of people coming to the clinic. You literally would wait in your car, and then they would come out and get you one by one. So the last image in the series is of an older woman being escorted in by a nurse, just out of abundance of safety, trying to keep everyone safe. So, yeah, there's 100 images.
Wow. And you have self-published a book.
Yes.
If people are interested, they can get a copy of the book. You want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, the book is it's interesting because I wasn't intending it to be anything other than something I put on Facebook. because I knew we weren't going out and I wanted to keep working and I wanted to say something. So I showed on Facebook and Instagram, but people liked the images. And so then Trove Gallery up here is also showing all of the G clays right now. And they said, why don't we do this show with G clay? So that meant when you get your artwork photographed, then you also, I also got a print. So I worked my way up to getting all the G clays. And I also worked to get everything photographed professionally all along, which is a huge expense. Yes. Even that, I did get grant through the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council up here, as well as the Minnesota State Arts Board, to get a book printed. It has it's a full color. It's a beautiful printed piece.
It sure is.
And I think it allows us to look at it calmly and remember and think of, I think the conversations start happening between people when they see certain images. It reminds them of something. I think that's the first step in helping as an artist. How can I help make changes in society that are going to benefit workers? I'm not a administrator. I'm not a politician, but I can depict what I think is good or what needs to change, or I can show this person is doing this and needs to be supported in better ways. Having those conversations about society through this series is the first step in making those changes real, I think. And the book is affordable, and I think it you can sit on the couch with your grandkids. Some people bought work saying, I want something to remember this year by. My wife and I were stuck in the house, or my kid one guy said his sister was a cleaner in Disneyland, and he bought the pastel of the person cleaning the train cars because that was his sister. So I'm hopeful. I think we have to be hopeful to make changes happen. We have to keep talking about it, otherwise it gets forgotten. Right. And people who are in the last thing we need is for the workers to be the ones having to fight. I can fight as a retired person, as a teacher. I wouldn't have had the time to make these discussions. Like we were talking earlier, we're trying to get workers together and they can't make it because they have to work.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Jim McKenzie, you have your hand up, please.
I did put my hand up. Yes, I don't have a question. I have a comment. I encountered your work through the Eastside Freedom Library at the Minnesota Book Festival that Rain Taxi does. And I was just struck by it immediately because it brought back so much. And the point of view was so telling. And so then I wanted to write something about it, which I've done, and I'll send that link to you. And then I studied each piece, and I thought about the audience for Eastside Freedom Library and wrote something accordingly. But the one there's some things one could say, and I liked hearing all the things the other panelists said. But I love especially, I think my favorite caption of all is the only one that's really, you didn't intend it that way, I don't think, but it's a sentence and it's a teaching. And it says, it's the one, essential workers ride mass transportation to work. So many people don't understand that. And I just so appreciate all the kind of teaching that shines through about this world in the choices you made. Now, my last comment is I want to tell you that I have shown it to a janitor I know really well, and some other people, and I had the occasion, and other workers, and to a person, they just get so excited. And by accident, I live in a condo building. By accident, I had your book in my hands as I came in one day when the postal worker was loading our different mailboxes. And I said, oh, let me stop that. Let me just show you this. I fumbled around till I found several of the postal worker pieces. And he's a guy in his 50s, I'd say. And he said, oh man, you just perked up my whole week. That's my comment. I want you to know that.
I appreciate that very much. Someone bought the piece of food delivery service, the people loading up somebody's truck, you know, when people would line up, people
Yes,
to get free food. And she gave it to Second Harvest up here. They're our main source for that kind of thing. And the one guy he just said, nobody knows what we do. They just think this happens. There was also a food delivery service walk up downtown through ACO. They're invisible. And I think that's a good thing to point out. Your mail carrier, people just expect the mail. They're struggling up here. We don't get mail every day. We used to. We don't get it the same day. I mean, we lost 1 million people. We've lost a lot this year. And so because of COVID, everything should change. We can change and be better, yes. I think. But we have to have the will to do that.
Right.
And I think I also believe we have leaders out there that aren't being listened to that can tell us how to do this.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Leslie, go ahead, please.
Hi. So I work as a cook in a hospital. So I see myself in several of your images, and I just wanted to thank you for letting us see ourselves in art, because often that's not the case with low-wage workers, especially. But I especially wanted to thank you and ask more about the pictures that you drew of protesting, because I particularly appreciate that those are included as part of our work.
Yeah.
And especially in Minnesota with the uprising in 2020, how important that work was in our broader society.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I feel like protesting is essential. I feel like as essential workers, this is part of who we are as people on the planet. We have to be speaking up, just like the voters. This is part of our duty to protest when things are, and these are peaceful protests. You can see the one image, I'll try and find it and put it up, but the kid is like talking to Unicorn Riot. I don't use words too often, but I'm going to shout out for Unicorn Riot. I got information from them and I couldn't get anywhere else. My kid is at that protest. My kid is in that march right there. I wanted to see it. I'm 3 hours away. But I think there was a lot of misinformation going out there as well. And I wanted to show that there was people from every walk of life standing together saying, this isn't right, what's going on. And, or we need to reevaluate, or they were standing together saying something's really wrong. And they were working together. And I feel at the time, it's essential. And it's still essential. There's people gathering on the city hall all the time with something we're missing, not listening to as a society, that people are compelled to have to come as a group, and they're outside the halls of the city to have to bring this point up, whether it's entirely something we can address or not. It's still something we're missing. So how as a society are we going to do better? Same with the voting. I have election judges and I have voters. It is the same thing right now. That's one thing I've thought with this series. If there's one thing that I have learned is, okay, so what are the things you can do? You can stand up and be counted, like in the protesters. You can vote. You can vote for the person who's going to take care of workers, that's going to look at how we pay them, how we do healthcare, how we do affordable housing. Person that's that can see the bigger picture, that's looking out to build a city with the infrastructure that sustains families. Families is not mom, dad, and kids anymore. Chosen families are how we are surviving. And I'm grateful for chosen families. And that doesn't always, we haven't shifted, to support chosen families. Insurance. Marriage license does not mean you're a family. It means we have to work harder at those kinds of things. So I'm bringing up too many topics that are offshoots, but I appreciate that you understood and are the same voice as I am as far as essential workers, includes people speaking up and protesting for what's right for the community, as well as voting.
Thank you. Thomas, please.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hey.
So first off, very compelling work. Very, very impressed. I guess my question is, in the moment when you were working on these pieces and like in the immediate aftermath as you go back and look at them, is there any change when you look at it now? I mean, in some cases, a year has gone by, a couple of years have gone by. We're still sort of in the pandemic, but to a large degree, depending on the individual, it's behind us a little bit. And I'm just wondering if that, when you look at some of these pieces, do you have a different sensation now than perhaps you did when you created them?
It's a very good question. To create the work in hope of change, that was the whole purpose of it, is to point out that the garbage collectors are working full-time without health insurance and hoping that will change. I don't know. That's the problem, is I don't know if things have changed for the better. And when I look at something, has my spirit changed, or am I still feeling strongly about that is a person that should be included in the series? One, there's a whole bunch of people that should be in the series that aren't. Whole bunch of, I remember somebody writing saying, you need to have truckers in there. I'm like, no kidding. I learned how to draw things that I don't typically draw, such as cars. So it's good for me to draw things I'm not familiar to draw. But changing when I look at the image, I think my passion for that image is the same, because I haven't seen a lot of changes. And that's probably the most frustrating. I thought because we had time. We are all stuck at home. We had time to fix this in a better way. And we just came back with the $1 raise and then took that back in 2 months. That's not fixing anything. That wasn't, I think I feel the same way about the images. I was worried, I will say this, when I saw them up on the wall all together, I was wondering if they all would hang together. But I used mostly the same colors and compositions, but I think as a whole, they're still speaking loudly for the same purpose of how are we taking care of these people? This is my family, this is your family, my neighbors. And I think the grief connected to the losses isn't always discussed, or it's kind of made private so people don't talk about it, because I think there was shame involved to a certain degree. And I also think there's families that broke apart because of this, versus the vaccination versus not getting vaccinated, people that passed, and that I can't even talk to, because the only thing I can do is say, here is a picture of your loved one, and I want them to be here next year too. If drawing a person brings attention to how if they'll be treated better in the future, that is the goal, to point out these people and the occupations. But your question is it's a curious one. When I look at the nurses one, I think about the nurses' strike. I think about all the things that have happened. 2 years, it seems like this has been much longer. So to quantify time-wise, it seems like we need to do better, but I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Meredith Cummings, do you want to read what you put in the chat, or summarize it, or?
Sure. So I'll come on.
Please.
I've been puttering today, so I haven't showered. So that's, I don't know if this is showing up or not, if you can see me. Oh, you can't. All right, doesn't matter.
There we go.
Can you see me?
Well, we see your,
I don't know why.
So I've been trying to read your question, and it's nice to see you.
Well, I guess you can't see me. But anyway, so yeah, I worked with you in 2020. Discovered you, I think, on Facebook and sent you a note and said this would go so well in the Kurt Vonnegut Journal. And you were just so gracious to let us put those in there. And it was our civic engagement issue, which we did on purpose for the elections of 2020 and so on. So we were just really, really grateful for that. And thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I was honored to be part of that journal. I remember too that Eastside Freedom Library was the place that you saw them as well through their site.
Yeah, that may have been, yeah.
Yeah. No, So It Goes is the name of the journal, and it comes out annually or biannual?
Annually, and actually the newest one for 2022 will be out next week in celebration of Kurt Vonnegut's 100th birthday.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's great.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what excited me about your work, Carolyn, was as a labor historian, I have long argued that workers and work are typically invisible in this culture, and that has contributed to lack of respect, lack of solidarity, lack of awareness. And I was very hopeful at the beginning of the pandemic, and when people began to use the adjective essential to describe workers. I thought, oh, maybe we're at a turning point in our culture, in our awareness of how things get done. And I thought your work was so fundamental to raising that awareness. And I have to say, I'm less optimistic now. And I think that whether it's the Minnesota legislature voting a whopping $480 in hazard pay to essential workers, whether it's the disrespect that we've seen continue for immigrant packing house workers or other workers, the word essential now feels a little bit like an ironic sense. And I'm thinking of Thomas Burke's question about what's changed since we started to think about this. So I just want to share that and see, Carolyn, if that provokes anything for you.
Yes, it does. And Peter, we had talked too about, truthfully, it's more sacrificial workers. That's what it's, the term essential workers has become so easy off the tongue. Rather than what does that mean then? Just say, hi, how are you? Do you really want to know? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with you. I was hopeful at the beginning, and I'm not so much now. I would hope I'm not any less, I'm not any less, what's the word? I still want things to change.
Right.
I'm still passionate about that. As you can see, speaking isn't my forte, but how to do this as an artist, this is my voice, drawing, painting. I don't think images always have to have a message that's a slap in the face, but I think if we want to reflect on who we are as a people, if the work is angry, there's something going on that I need to be paying attention to, because that anger depicts it. If I'm drawing family, I'm used to drawing and painting family or community events, the way we treat each other, the interactions between people. And you know, some of those things I think I used to take, I just assume. And I'm seeing now that those aren't the ways people are treating each other anymore. They don't look out for the healthcare for their employees. They just want more hours. They want, and they'll say, well, they don't want to work. I said, really? I said, I think we've lost 1 million workers. And I said, you need to pay them. Well, they don't know what to do. I said, teach them, you know, work with your workers, but pay them a living wage. I bet you they'll show up and be there on time if you pay them a living wage so that they can pay for an apartment and their gas for their car and they're not, this isn't a lot of money we're talking here when comparison to how things go. So that's the change. I don't know how you make those in charge not have to need another boat. I don't know how, you know, that's kind of rude, but that's kind of, I don't get that when there's this much poverty and suffering in our country. I see a question from Meg from New Zealand.
Oh, good.
She says, I agree completely with Carolyn that we have not fixed society. Data collection and sharing, I find this the most disheartening. Here in New Zealand, data is now volunteered, not collected, including at our borders. Nurses' wages problematic before 2020 has gone up with great difficulty, a smidgen. I don't know what I was thinking. I was ever so hopeful the world would come together and progress. Sad, mad face. So I don't know. Do you think the work can bring us to a better place, make changes? It's not putting money in anybody's pocket, but maybe the person that is in charge of wages is going to look at this and think a little harder and make the change so that they pay, I mean, $25 an hour, I think is minimum wage in my mind. If you're trying to survive in Minneapolis and not in a fancy apartment and have a car with, I don't even know if you can afford a car and get insurance on that. But,
well, I'm hopeful that the sort of the overall discourse evolves. And so when the nurses put up picket lines and say that what's important to them is to have a voice in staffing, not just what they're being paid, but to have a voice in staffing, that more of us understand what they're saying. When railroad workers say they get 1 paid sick day a year and they can't go to graduation or a wedding or a funeral and I think that when we're discovering how many of us face the same limitations, and I think your art is a vital tool in raising that awareness and giving us kind of mirrors to look in and see ourselves and see each other in. And so we're not done by a long shot, but I think that the great optimism that I felt, even amidst the grief and the fear in the early months, but the optimism that workers who had been overlooked and ignored for decades were suddenly front and center, that has not had legs. But the impact on our overall discourse is maybe moving, the needle is moving a bit.
Well, if we learned anything over these last few years is we can't assume it's fixed. Yeah. Even if you think civil rights legislation did something positive, did we quit behaving like it's part of our life? Look where we are now. Yeah. You know, so it has to be a constant. And I think there's a way to say, and I'm hoping the art is part of it. We can say these things without anger. We can just keep saying the truth, saying it in a good way. It's part of my daily life. This is what you do. You don't make problems for people. I think if we just start, we have to be a little more proactive, though, I would say, because the counter is so negative.
Yeah. Yeah. Heath, any parting comments from you?
Well, I've enjoyed the conversation very much. I think I kind of go between both of you in a way. I think the hope lies with work like Carolyn's been doing, which is valuing our people, and there's a sense of hopefulness with that. There's a real, grassroots sense of love and compassion, and that comes through. But I mean, she's also strategic enough to put in the protest as part of this life, but part of this action, and other elements too. There's the critical side of it, is integrated with it. And I think the work of art really has to do with integrating with other activities. It isn't art in itself that's going to change the world, but art is working with people, with the workers, with grassroots organizations that lends its power, lends its capabilities, as Carolyn is doing, to make a difference, to get the momentum going. And that to me is the hope. It's not on its own, but it's with other forces. And I see the resurgence in the labor movement, the union movement, in places like Starbucks and Amazon. That's hopeful, and that needs the support of others and artists. Yeah.
Thank you. Carolyn, any parting comments you want to offer?
I just want to thank you all for coming and having a conversation. And I hope we keep talking about all of this. Absolutely. And as an artist, I also appreciate your support. We work in our studios alone a lot and in our own heads. And we have a few trusted critique people around us. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's nice to gather and be on one voice. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for giving us something to talk about. Thank you. So I want to remind everyone that there will be a panel discussion a week from today. Leslie, who's with us today, will be one of the people with us next week. And that will be a panel of workers, some of whose work is represented in the work that Carolyn has created. I want to invite everyone to come to the Eastside Freedom Library and see the work in person in its full beauty. And we have copies of the book, so we want to encourage you to get a copy of the book so that you can spread the word and spread the images and have these conversations with others. This video of our conversation today will, in a couple of days, hopefully, be up on the Eastside Freedom Library's YouTube page so that you can direct people to also watch the video of this conversation. I want to encourage you to read Jim McKenzie's blog on the Eastside Freedom Library website. Jim has drawn out some very interesting ideas about the relationship between Carolyn's work and what we mean by democracy. And this is a good week, obviously, to be thinking about that. Hopefully everybody's going to vote on Tuesday, or you voted already. Let's make sure that we use what voice we have. I also want to mention that this coming Thursday evening, we will be premiering by Zoom a new documentary movie about the history of the farmer labor movement in Minnesota, a movie made by Randy Croce, Anna Kurharczyk, and Tom O'Connell. And they will be presenting the movie, and we'll be watching it this Tuesday evening at 7. You can get the link from our website. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And as an old friend used to say, it takes a lot of us bringing pieces of straw to make the bricks. And a number of you brought some good pieces of straw to the conversation today, and we're leaving, I think, with some good solid bricks as a consequence. So stay well, everyone, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Carolyn, thank you so much.